Okay, well, it's 6 o'clock. We're going to get started here with our webinar tonight, Building Together ADU Insights with City Staff from Novato, San Rafael, and unincorporated Marin County. I'm Scott Johnson. I'll be your host tonight, and I am the director of the ADU Center, a nonprofit that is partnering with the county and the jurisdictions in the county to help homeowners understand the ADU process, get started with their projects, and hopefully be really successful in building their ADUs. We have a lot of tools online and that you can find from our website at adumarin.org. That is the hub for ADU information and ADU tools across Marin County. On that site, you're going to find a number of different things, great information, but also there's going to be a downloadable workbook that walks you through kind of pre-construction exercises and thought processes about getting ready to build an ADU. There's also there's the cover of the workbook, and that's a PDF. You can download it and print it. We also have the calculator, which allows you to put in information about the kind of ADU you want to build, and some information about your property, and it will help give you a sense of what the potential costs are likely to be. You can also build financial models using the finance tab. You can see what it will likely rent for in your market, as well as cost projections over time and impacts to property value. So it's a really good tool to kind of game out some different options for ADUs for your property that will hopefully be the right solution for you. There's additional information on there. There's individual city rules are posted. There are an address lookup tool that will show you the rules for your parcel. We've got stories and floor plans from people who have built ADUs in Marin successfully, as well as this is one of our webinars. We'll be doing more as we go on through the year with county staff and people in the industry to help give a broader perspective of the whole ADU process. The other thing that we have at the website is our feasibility consultation. Now, this is a new offering we have at ADU Marin, where you can sign up, provide some information about your property and your goals and your budget, and then we will do pre-research on your property, and you will get to have a one-on-one hour call with me or one of our other ADU experts here at the ADU Center to talk about early steps of your process. So it's really helpful at the end of that hour. We will also then produce a report that covers a lot of things that we talked about that hour. So you've got a written record of everything that we talked about. And in chat tonight, we'll have Amity Armstrong. She is going to be dropping links about the things that we're talking about, so you can gather more information, because there's a lot more information that we can touch on tonight than we can actually go into detail. And tonight we're really going to be focusing on the permitting side, the city interface side of an ADU project. An ADU project is much more than just a permit, but that can be sometimes the hardest part to understand. So tonight we have with us from Novato, we have Steve Marshall and Vivek Damodaran, and then from City of San Rafael, we have Margaret Kavanaugh. And we are expecting to have Emmanuel Barracat from Marin County, but unfortunately they haven't been able to join us just yet. So we'll hopefully be able to bring in county information later on in the evening. And so thank you, all of you, for joining me tonight, for taking time out of your schedules to talk about ADUs. I really want to try and dive into what homeowners should know, insights you've learned after seeing ADUs in your cities in the last 4 years, and what homeowners should be considering when they're looking at an ADU project. I know tonight with all of us here, we can only speak really in generalities. It's probably, we can't go into too much detail about any particular project because every ADU is an edge case. But we hopefully that for those of you sitting at home, this will provide you avenues in which you can gather more information. And so I think, where we will start, I think, is maybe we'll start with Steve, City of Novato. Can you summarize the ADU rules in Novato fairly quickly?
Sure, I'll take a shot at that. So, of course, as most agencies are situated in California, we're all subject to a uniform statute that dictates the minimums and maximums that an agency can require for ADU construction. So Novato's current ordinance focused on meeting the baseline conditions of state law without a lot of what I'll call frills or exceptions. And so it was really kind of that baby step into the new world of the state's legislation on ADUs. So we took a perspective that what we wanted to do was try to distill state law into a usable format. So if, for those of you joining us tonight, if you've actually looked at the statute, um, it has some issues in terms of clarity and organization. So what we attempted to do in Novato was take state law, distill it into standards in a format that was meaningful for a homeowner who's considering an ADU, a design professional like an architect or some other designer who will be serving clients who want to do ADUs, and then planners. It shouldn't take all of us going constantly back to state law and trying to understand intent and interpretation. So we've really focused on two tiers. The first tier is the state mandated building permit only tier. So that's different types of ADUs that can only be required to obtain a building permit to construct. And then we have a second tier of ADUs that are addressed through a planning permit. So in that process, you would obtain your planning permit first and then move into the building permit stage. So I think that's a pretty fair overview of where we are in Novato. And again, just want to emphasize that the ordinance is intended to meet the baseline requirements of the state law. And over time, I have a suspicion that as ADUs, people become more comfortable with ADUs, there may be some changes to allow maybe a larger size unit or some other options to pursue different configurations. And then just to close out my remarks, I would note that Vivek and I are in the process of updating Novato's ordinance to reflect some recent changes to state law. And for folks who are looking at ADUs, if you know of something that's in state law and you don't see it in our ordinance, be assured that if you're entitled to it through state law, you will be considered from the perspective of state law. So state law always preempts local regulations, and that's what we adhere to. And keeping up with the state's changes is often difficult because we have a fairly rigorous process to take zoning code amendments through that may not reflect how quickly the legislature changes the standards. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, and that's thank you. That's great. And so for the like I said, what you said, for the category one, the state exempt, that's going to be 800 square feet and less, right? And are conversions of existing structures considered in that building permit only?
Yeah, so in that category, there are three different arrangements. One is a detached unit, there's a conversion, and then there's a separate class for multifamily
All
dwellings.
right.
So apartment units that are able to provide or have the ability to have ADUs. And I'll also let Vivek step in. Vivek will be the technical expert on actual implementation of our ordinance. So that's why he's here tonight. No pressure.
No, that's correct. We have the two tiers, like Steve mentioned, the building permit only option, as well as the building permit and accessory dwelling unit permit option. So for the building permit option, we allow for a detached ADU, so 800 square foot maximum size limit, 4-foot side and rear setbacks, and then a height limit of 16 feet. I will add that there is a added height limit for ADUs that are within a half-mile of public transit or a high quality transit corridor. And that height limit goes up to 18 feet versus 16 feet. And then the other option is a conversion ADU, so conversion of an existing structure or a conversion of existing floor area or building area. And similarly, that will have 4-foot side and rear well, actually, there's no setback for that because that would be a conversion. There's an allowance for up to 150 square feet for those types of units, and that's primarily for allowing for ingress and egress. And the minimum conversion floor area would be equivalent to what is allowed for an efficiency unit. And other than that, there is no size limit for conversion ADUs. And that's because you're converting existing floor area. And then for the second tier, the ones that we allow for, the ones that require both a planning permit and a building permit, those are really for units that go beyond what the state mandates, the state minimum mandates. So those are for detached ADUs that go above 800 square feet. So if you're going up to 850 or 1,000 square feet, for 850 square feet, that's our 0 to 1 bedroom units. Anything beyond that, anything above 850 square feet, that's for units that have 2 or more bedrooms. And those have a similar setback requirement, 4-foot side and rear, and then the height limit's similar to what's required for the building permit detached ADUs. So 16 feet and then 18 feet if you're within a half mile of public or a high quality transit corridor.
And so that would be like Smart Train.
Exactly.
With
So that
high
would
quality
be
trains, so half mile of
exactly,
that
yeah.
corridor.
So that
Yeah.
does not include bus stops. That is in Novato, that's just our smart train stations.
Right.
And then the other option would be for an attached ADU. So for an attached ADU, we have a maximum floor area or size limit similar to the detached. So 850 for 0 to 1 bedroom units, 1,000 for 2 bedrooms or more. And then we have a same 4-foot side and rear setback. Now for those, we have a added height limit. So it's going to be 25 feet versus 16 or 18 feet. So that would be the primary difference for an attached ADU.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, and for conversions, I think generally that garage conversions are really common for considered conversions, or sometimes basements or attics. Though probably aren't that many attics in Novato as I think about it, but or basements for that matter. But interior conversions as well, where you sometimes you can carve off a master bedroom suite or something into a 400 square foot or 300 square foot ADU. And
Exactly.
I'll give the presenters a warning. We will probably go over junior ADUs here in a few minutes. So, I want to get to Margaret though and talk about San Rafael and San Rafael's rules for ADUs.
Good evening, everybody. We're in line with what the City of Novato staff has said. Our ordinance was updated last in 2022. I was doing a presentation. We had realtors ask us to do presentations. Wintertime, we can go out into the community and proactively talk to people. I think it's in everyone's best interest. So I was looking up some information, and I realized that since we adopted our ordinance in 2022, the state has changed the state ordinance 4 times. So to
Yep.
Steve's point, it's a continuous task to try to make sure our local code is aligned with the state code. And just like Novato, anything that we aren't aligned with when it comes to the state of California, and we automatically, it's just because we don't have the staff to continuously update our ordinance. We're happy to go along with the state standards. There's not any question that those prevail, and we're a pro-housing city. My city council's on record for saying that. We are trying to find ways to get to yes using the development standards that are laid out in our municipal code and as augmented by HCD, by the state of California. HCD, sorry, I hate to break into acronyms so early in a presentation. Housing and Community Development, which is our department in the state that keeps this ball rolling, so to speak. The only thing that I would add is our minimum size for our ADUs. So we're going to do JADUs later, but our ADUs, we're at 1,000 square feet over. So we went a little higher than the state minimum. So in a attached ADU, a detached ADU, you are allowed 1,000 square feet minimum, as opposed to the or 50% of the floor area of the existing primary unit, whichever is less. So depending on who you are and what you've got, we bumped it up a little from the 800, but pretty much I was listening along to what the City of Novato staff was saying. We're pretty much in alignment on everything else. And most of our conversions that we see are garages, and per the state code, you do not have to replace that parking, right? So if you convert your garage, you do not have to make up for the parking that was removed from your single family dwelling. So, but that's across the state as well. But we're happy to look at projects and talk to people. Everything is through a building permit. We have planners reviewing the building permits when it comes in. But otherwise, really, the staff from Novato covered it quite well.
Yeah. So I want to be clear for two things, actually. I want to be clear. So inside the AD world, inside baseball, we look at 800 square feet and less, as we call them, sort of the state exempt ADUs are kind of the most protected in terms of they've got the greatest freedom of where they can be built and things like that. And so San Rafael, you're taking that concept and you're applying it to 1,000 square feet and less. Is that right?
Yeah, it's
Mostly.
ministerial at 1,000
Oh,
square feet.
okay, okay.
Yeah, so it's
That's big, literally.
We think that was it's something we could offer. You feel the difference between your 800 square foot ADU and your 1,000 square foot ADU. So it was something. I wasn't actually working with the city at the time, but I'm sure that the framers were thinking how livable that might feel, and
Yeah.
they had the ability to bump that up a bit. So I'm glad that we start there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I will say for the homeowners, the state law has changed repeatedly. I mean, from 2017, 2021, 2, 3, 4, and will change again this year. But almost all the changes, I can't think of any change that hasn't been more conducive to ADUs, allowing for more options for ADUs. And so if you're considering an ADU now, I would say that the funnel is widening. So if you can do an ADU now, the law changes are not going to rule you out. They may provide you more options, or perhaps 2 more feet of height, or something like that. Most of the changes are not as substantive as they were 4 years ago. But if you're thinking about it now, it's never been a better time to build an ADU, but it is getting better a little bit incrementally each year. So there are this is common across, I think, all the jurisdictions in which we work, that every city is looking at revising their ADU code every year. It does take a while because it is it isn't a little thing from a process standpoint. And so if you're at home and you want to look at the the most up-to-date codes, or we have them posted on the ADU Marin website. The truth is, most of those are now out of date. And so, I encourage everyone to, contact a planner at the city. We're going to be getting updated codes as soon as we can get them confirmed with the various cities in Marin and the county. And we'll be getting them up on ADU Marin as soon as we feel confident that they are the code that's going to be passed this year. But always a good idea to check with the city and start the dialogue early, and contact us as well. You can email us info@adumarin.org. As we're partnering with all these jurisdictions to try and provide information in clear and easy ways. So if you have additional questions that you aren't asking tonight, or if you talk to a friend and they have questions, reach out to us, reach out to the city that you're in, and you can get more information that way. So that's that's sort of the basics of the ordinances. But the AD ordinance is not the only kind of rule set that someone is going to have to look at. Do you have, are there, for example, we've seen in other jurisdictions just this week when we've had other webinars, things like discretionary tree removal permits, additional soils reports when you're going to build on slopes. I mean, it isn't just one permit. There's a suite of information often needs to get gathered. For as much as it's hard to say for a common ADU project, but for a common ADU project, what other kind of oversight or reports are often needed? And I'll start, since Margaret's up, I'll keep going with Margaret if you want to.
Okay, I took a step sideways here to see where that was going to land. So,
Yep.
Right. Although it's a ministerial permit to build an ADU, and just to go back a step, Scott, please talk to the planning staff. We always have at least one planner on duty at the counter. If we can't answer your questions right then, we will look them up and we'll get back to you. So it's the common, I was smiling at the common ADU. It's always, you think it's common and you're like, no, there's something else there. So planning will look to make sure that, as you said, the zoning regulations, how what the height is, what's the setbacks, does a parking space required for the ADU? Are they within a quarter mile or a half mile of the high frequency transit stop? All those things, right? There's this checklist that we have. But the building division will also have their own checklist as any other habitable space in our part of the world will have, right? So we want the people in those dwelling units to be safe. So for example, if you're near a slide area, we're going to talk about soils reports. If you're near a seismically active fault zone, we're going to talk to you about that too. We live in the most beautiful part of the country, but it comes with things slide and things shake and then things flood, right? There's a whole flood zone discussion that happens too. So the project is still subject to the most current version of the building code, and we will make sure that minimum standards are met to make sure that people living inside are safe.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and it's something that I repeat often, and I'll repeat it right now, is that, an ADU is a special sort of class of residence in terms of allowing you to build it on your property. But once that is cleared, once you figure out that you're allowed to build it, it does have to meet all the building codes. And California's got some of the most complex, comprehensive building codes in the world. And so if it's 300 square feet or 1,200 square feet or something in between, it still needs to have everything that any other house in California has. And that is a much bigger project and process than adding on a master bedroom or remodeling your kitchen. It's another level. And so it is important, I think, for homeowners to understand that while it's certainly possible, and I think ADUs are great, I wouldn't do what I do if I didn't. It is a big, complex, complicated project, and the earlier you can start to get more information and start to think through all those steps, utilities and floodplain and WUI and everything else, the better sense of your project that you're going to have, and the better decisions you're going to make about your project going forward. And so I'm going to kick it to back in Novato. Do you see things similar to San Rafael, or are there other agencies and reports that have to get done when ADUs come across your desk?
Off the top of my head, I think one of the biggest things is our special districts. We have the fire district, water district, sanitary sewer. So those are kind of the three big agencies that folks should be talking to concurrent to talking to planning staff, just because they have their own set of requirements as well that will impact the feasibility of the project. So for example, fire district would be my recommendation to start with, because they have a fire sprinkler requirement which may trigger additional requirements from our water district, and those two agencies alone, their processes and fees may change how you design your project. In addition to that, we do have our standard building permit process, and through that process there are I believe a soils report may be required through that process for certain properties. But other than that, similar to San Rafael, we're really looking at health and safety and meeting building code through that building permit process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's.
Oh, good, Scott.
Go ahead, Steve. No,
Yeah, I was going to add on. Probably relevant in this conversation is, and it may be the same in San Rafael and other agencies in Marin County, we will have ordinances that apply to certain site conditions. So waterways running through a property, wetland features, slope conditions. I know many agencies in Marin County have slope or hillside ordinances, and Novato certainly has one. And so what we look for is those ordinances still apply to properties and still apply to the proposal to develop an ADU. And so what that means is you may come in with a particular ADU that you want in mind. So let's say it's a detached ADU and you're planning to site it on the side of a slope. You may not be able to construct that type of ADU and be in compliance with the city's hillside ordinance. So the way our ADU ordinance is structured is you would have to look at one of the other ADU options for the property, whether that's a conversion or an attached product. So I put that out there because I think there's a sense that the state broadly opened the door to any ADU of your choosing as a homeowner, and it's really not the case. So I think oftentimes people come in and say, hey, I'm entitled to an ADU and I want it here. And what they end up hearing from a planner is you have a site condition or a constraint that won't allow it there, so you have to consider a different option. So I think that's really important for folks when they're in the sort of the infancy of the concept of an ADU, that they're not only getting a sense of the costs involved, but they come down and get some information about their property. And for Novato, we have a very robust mapping system with a lot of data about properties and their conditions. And so we can give a homeowner a sense of what the constraints are, what I'll call supplemental ordinances apply to their property, and then how to navigate that with their ADU projects. So really important for early upfront contact. Again, you're building a small home here, and I'm sure most of the folks who are joining us tonight have maybe done some initial research. It's not an insignificant investment in the property. So getting all that information up front is really important, and in working with Scott's team on that, the financial aspects and so forth, I think are really beneficial at the upfront period.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's, you bring up the mapping. This is something that Marin Map is a GIS website, a mapping website that anybody can log on to and look up their own property and get information. It's not completely comprehensive, but it'll show flood information or WUI information or zoning, WUI, wildland urban interface things. And so it's a good place to start if you're thinking, oh, I think I want to do an ADU. I mean, this is what we do professionally, is when someone comes to us and says, I have questions about an ADU, I'm like, what's your address? And then we go look it up on Marin Map first to start to get a sense of the property and what might come into affect it. And unfortunately, we haven't been joined by our county representative tonight. I'm not sure what happened, if they just weren't able to make it, but I see a lot of questions about septic in the chat, and I think this is a good time to bring up septic. If you're in the county and you're on septic or well, really your very first step is going to be, before even thinking about design of the ADU, is figuring out your well and septic situation, because those two things, in our experience, are the two biggest potential blockers for an ADU project. Septic, I'll try and keep this as short as I can, but septic in general is based on the number of bedrooms on the property. So you'll have a 3-bedroom permit and a 3-bedroom house, or a 5-bedroom permit and a 4-bedroom house. And it's a measure of septic capacity. And so when you want to bring an ADU on, whether it's a studio or 1,000 square feet, you're adding bedrooms to that system, to that property, and you need to update your septic permit and possibly your septic system to match. And there's a number of other issues that go on with that. Is your septic permit may be 40 or 50 years old, and the septic system hasn't been maintained and wouldn't essentially, pass muster today. So if you have a septic system, you may need to recertify it. You may need to do a septic analysis on your property and plan for a new septic system. And those costs can get pretty expensive, both the plans and the development of a septic system. So for anyone who's on septic, I think personally, your first stop is going to be the septic agency to figure out what your current conditions are, what your permit is, and then what you would need to do to add an ADU, add an additional bedroom or two onto the site. There may be options such as things like a bedroom swap, which are more complicated than they often are talked about. They've gotten more complicated in previous years. But then also water, and I sort of left this one for last because water, if there's a water issue on site, if there's a water availability issue on site, you don't have water from an agency, it's from a well. If you can't prove that you have enough water on site and you're in a water deficient area, there's not really any way to solve that. We often talk about some of the constraints on ADUs either tend to be regulatory or financial, that you can do something, but it's going to cost you so much money that the ADU project doesn't really make sense anymore. But with water, if you're on a well or you're in an area that has low water availability, again, I believe this information can be found on the Marin Map GIS site. But money, you can't buy your way out of a water problem. You can build, in most cases, there's always exceptions, you can build septic systems, they just tend to get really expensive. So water tends to be a regulatory limit on ADUs, while septic tends to be a financial limit on ADUs. And as we're sort of talking about the ordinance and sizes and things, I saw a question and we'll get to all the questions before the end here, but I saw a question of how many ADUs can you have on your property? And in the county, county is a little bit different than most in that you are allowed 2 ADUs. We're not talking about junior ADUs here. 2 ADUs if they meet specific requirements. And if memory serves, I believe it's the under 800 square feet, and I think one's detached and one's attached. But for, let's say for Novato, how many ADUs and of what type are you allowed in Novato?
Yeah, so well, I realize now that I didn't mention where ADUs are permitted in town.
Oh,
So
thank you.
just to clarify, ADUs are allowed on properties with existing or proposed single or multifamily dwelling units. So for single family properties, we allow up to one accessory dwelling unit and one junior accessory dwelling unit. So in total, you'd have two additional units. For multifamily, it would be two detached ADUs as well as I believe it's 25% of the number of multifamily dwelling units on the property.
All right. And for San Rafael?
It's a really good question. The building official and I were discussing this the other day. I believe the information that Vivek just put out actually completely aligns with my understanding of the state regs. There was a presentation given by HCD about 6 months ago that actually said you can have 2 and 2. So we take this question on an individual basis at this point. We reach over to HCD and say, hey, gentlemen, because so that's what I mean by this is a fluid and dynamic conversation. So you'd have to be able to cite 2 of these units on your property, right? So that's not our common. Our common one is if someone wants a JADU or an ADU. We haven't had to reach over lately to see where we are, but I have heard that HCD not only said you could have twice the amount, I've also heard they've actually stepped that back. So one thing I won't bluff you. I will tell you if that seems to be in flux sometimes, and I will reach over to our contacts in the state and find out where that is currently landing. But it is a financial commitment. One ADU can be so very expensive, and it doesn't get cheaper in bulk. And I also want to throw in water and sewer. One, our GIS on our website is fabulous. I'm very impressed by it. I'm not responsible for it, so I can brag on it. It's great. You can see a lot of things about your property, the zoning, the hillside ordinance, if it kicks in. All kinds of information available there. The wild urban interface, or the WUI, is another issue. And again, beautiful part of the country, but we have our own risks, right? But that's the tip of the iceberg. So if you can start there, you can do that after hours, right? You can on your own time kind of look that up, and then come on in and talk to us, and we can talk to you about any other constraints. We're on water and sewer utilities in San Rafael, and one of the things that I think surprises folks, and just anecdotally talking to people at the counter, is you have to run your utilities to that ADU, right? So so we don't have to worry about if you get water in San Rafael, but you do have to pay for how it gets there. And
Yeah.
it's one of those things that you're doing your I'm so glad that Scott and his team are helping, because people get into the big expenses and then they get into utilities, and it's like, oh, that's huge. It's actually much more than I thought it was going to be. And it's the good news is we have sewer and water, and the harder news, or the challenge, might be it's going to not be the cheapest thing you're talking about. So I just wanted to put a shout out for what we're looking at.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. That's two things there is with one is with HCD, so Housing Community Development Department of California. They have a great website about ADUs. If you do a Google search for HCD ADU, it'll bring you there. And they have an ADU handbook, which is written. It has the whole text of the state law, and so local rules are slightly different sometimes. But there's a lot of great sort of FAQ information in there, and there is also a homeowner hotline, basically, where as a homeowner, if you're having an issue, you can contact HCD and try and get clarity. And I've used them professionally to answer questions about gray areas that we come across in the law or in the application of the law. And it takes about a week or so, but they are generally very good about giving us good answers that we can move forward with. And on utilities, for anyone, the homeowners, if you sign up for a consultation, you'll spend probably 20 minutes at least with me of that hour talking about utilities, because before you're in design, when you're doing pre-construction research, utilities are more or less design agnostic. So it doesn't really matter what the roof line is or where the windows are, or even where the front door is of your ADU. You need to be thinking about your utilities early on because they can be big cost drivers. And depending on the size of your ADU and the jurisdiction that you're in, you can sometimes tee off the house and have your sewer line connect to the sewer line, the sewer lateral that runs between the house and the street. And sometimes you need to go out to the street to the actual sewer main, and same with water. And if you go out to the street, if you go out to the public right of way, your costs get much, much bigger. And there's balances there in terms of if this is a pure rental, you probably want to get a separate water meter, or probably you're definitely going to have a separate electrical meter because that's going to be a separate rental. Let them have their own bill. Don't try and share a bill across rentals if it's not, or even if it is family, because you have a lot of arguments about who has to pay how much of what electrical bill. But sometimes separate utilities are worth the upfront cost for the long-term ease of operation of a rental. And we'll talk some more about renter information in a minute, but utilities are a really big thing. And I think that's something that everybody, again, before you're into a design contract or something, you can start getting research, talking to your city, figuring out, when do they require second utility connections? What is your current existing utility connections? Is your sewer line in bad shape? My house is from 1949. Been on my list for 2 years to replace my sewer line, and there's no way I can build an ADU if I didn't include that cost because it wouldn't handle being modified at this point. So those kinds of big questions early on are often sidestepped because you get focused on what's it going to look like, how big is it, what their bedrooms, which I fully understand, but the existing conditions and the utility connections are actually going to be a big part of your construction costs and a big part of where the challenges need to be solved.
Scott, if I could just add on to that, the other thing that's kind of a hidden item that I'm sure your team points out early is impact fees, right? So if you are below 750 square feet, the state of California prohibits impact fees on utilities. But so yes, you can have 1,000 square feet, but you might want 749, right? And so
Right.
all these things you want to think about early, and it is so easy to get it pulled into I call it like the HGTV version of it. So you're looking at the open floor plan and the granite, but the costs are going to be in exactly what you're touching on.
Yeah, and thank you. And that's that's for fees, there tend to be kind of three class sizes: small, medium, and large. It's kind of a Goldilocks situation for ADUs. If you're building an ADU and you're under 500 square feet, you're going to pay the minimum amount in fees. Typically, and I'll ask both of you guys if you guys can come up with typical fees for different class sizes. I know that's kind of a hard ask, but you don't pay impact fees. You often don't pay school fees. There are often other fees that are paid, and you often only pay 1% or 1% and a couple of small fees of the project budget. Once you're at 500 square feet, 500 to 749, you pay some additional fees. The costs go up a little bit. And then once you're over 750 or 750 and above, the costs go up some more. And they tend to be, somewhere between $3,000 and $7,000 difference between each segment of that market. And we bring that up. I bring it up in our consultations so that people know that those price boundaries exist. I would say, given the total cost of the project, the total potential rent over the life of the project, don't choose your project based on permit fee, but then don't choose a project that's 502 square feet. Do 490 or 495, or do 550 or 600. Don't do 756, do 800. Because you're going to pay those fees, you may as well get that benefit of extra space as well. So let's see, I'll go to Vivek. Do you have a ballpark sense of what sort of order of magnitude fees are at the different sizes?
So for development impact fees, I have a range. I don't have specific fees for individual unit sizes, just because that changes depending on the primary home size, because we calculate our development impact fees based off a ratio of the ADU size and the primary home size. So there's a wide margin there. So on average, I'd say it's about $5,000 to $10,000 for development impact fees for units, again, over 749 square feet, so 750 plus. So that's generally the range that we have for our development impact fees. And at the high end, it's that $10,000 mark because that's the current threshold we have for development impact fees for ADUs specifically.
Right. Yeah. So there. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say I was trying to think of building permit costs in general, and that's a tough question because it's the same answer, and it depends on the valuation of work, which is how we calculate our building permit cost, and then it also depends on the home size and the unit size because that impacts the development impact fee. So it's a complicated answer.
Yeah, it gets to be pretty calculus. I
Yeah.
remember when we first started, I came from the side from building ADUs, and it always felt like the fee schedule was sort of impossible to predict because there are so many variables. And now with ADUs, it's simplified a bit. But yeah, project size, project valuation, special district fees, whether or not you're over 500 square feet, school district fees. It's uh, ballpark is the best anybody can get until you've actually kind of got a project ready to run through the system. We foolishly early on tried to get the jurisdictions to sit down and sort of give us, more concrete numbers than that, and they're like, it's impossible because it's based on the project. You can't just say, oh, a 500 square foot ADU is going to be X because it doesn't work that way. So, but in general, there's sort of order of magnitude. And again, ultimately, the fees are just a portion of the total project, and then the rent. We did calculations on if there were $10,000 differences in fees from one size class to the next, and that's high. That's not usually that much difference between size class. From rent, that the difference in rent between those two, say 700 square feet versus 1,200 square feet, you're going to make back that fee difference in about 16 months. So, the upfront costs are obviously painful. It's a big chunk of money, but ultimately for the operation of the ADU over time, it quickly becomes something that's not as critical, I think. Let's see, we are at 6:42 and we have got 30 questions. I think I am going to switch. I do want to mention something about renting really quickly because, as Margaret said, that there's sort of the HGTV focus of the ADUs. I know I'm guilty of it when I'm looking at ADU plans all the time, but the construction is, a year, 2 years process from sort of sitting down with an architect and unlocking the front doors, typically between a year and 2 years for most folks. It's going to be a rental, and whether that's for family or for, on the market for many, many, many years after that. And I think a lot of folks at this stage, when they're thinking about an ADU, are not thinking about being a landlord. They're thinking about the build. And we've gotten some great questions about, well, what do I need to know if I'm going to become a landlord? And this counts for family and for strangers, I think. Good rental agreements, understanding what your rights and responsibilities are as a landlord, understanding what the renter protections are in your city, because they do sometimes vary from city to city. There's broad state renter protections, but there's also individual jurisdiction renter protections as well. And so I talked to a number of fair housing organizations to sort of see, what do I need to know if I'm a homeowner who wants to be a landlord? And they all gave me the same answer, which tells me it's probably a pretty good one, which is they mentioned 3 NOLO press books. And you can order them online. 2 of them come in a bundle. But it's essentially, your rights and responsibilities as a landlord in California. There's another one that's fairly new that's designed for if you're only renting a single house, an ADU, as opposed to, say, an apartment building or multiple rentals. And I think the third one was had sample agreements and how to do background checks and things like that. And so I think Amity's going to drop those in chat. If you're, if you're thinking about an ADU, you also need to think about operating the ADU ultimately, because that's going to be equally as important as getting the project right, is running it legally, safely, and making sure you understand what you're in for as a landlord. So with that, with 15 minutes to go, I'm going to start going through some of these questions. And some of them, unfortunately, because we didn't get the representative from the county, I don't want to answer detailed questions for them, but we will try and have information. So I'll give you senses of general information where I can. Minimum square footage of a junior ADU in an unincorporated Marin. Typically, the minimums for a living space are either 150 square feet or 220 square feet. And I believe that with juniors, it's often 150 square feet, but that is an answer with an asterisk afterwards. If you want to email me, scott@aducenter.org, I will follow up with the county and make sure that I'm giving you the right information, but it's typically 150 or 220. So for how many ADU permits have you seen in the last couple of years? We'll start with Vivek.
Yeah, so last couple of years, I think we've seen annually about 20 to 30 ADUs, and that's a combination of building permit ADUs that and planning application ADUs. But yeah, as far as actually no, that's primarily building permit ADUs, the 20 to 30 number, which
That's
is
pretty good. I mean, because they were single digits, if at all, before 2017, right? I mean, almost nobody
yeah.
was building ADUs before that.
I think yeah, and we had done a graphic for city council when we did our big update, and in 2018, if I remember correctly, we had 8 ADUs, and then in 2018 and 2019, we had seen a jump up to close to 30 units. So kind of a
Yeah,
big leap, and then in
big
2020,
growth.
about 40 plus. Yeah.
That's a lot of affordable housing for Nevada. That's fantastic. San Rafael, how many have you seen in the last few years?
We have the same annual update that Novato did, and I did not want to look away from the meeting and pull that up to have the number handy. So, but we track, that's about what we're seeing too. With that same exact curve going up from the 2017, 2018s. And just anecdotally, because I've been here for about 6 months, I would say just talking with our planning staff and listening at the counter, my desk is pretty close, so I can hear lots of conversations. We are getting at least, I'd say, on average 25 questions a week on ADUs, right? And then as people find out they're financing things change out of there. But we have seen quite a exponentially high curve starting back when the state started changing the laws. So
Yeah,
I'm happy to look that up for you, Scott, and send it over to you so you have it for your stats. But
yeah,
we are
that'd be
it's
great.
a very common discussion and application and a very common submittal in our plan check queue. So they are a common occurrence in San Rafael.
Awesome. So would finishing a shed while expanding its footprint fall under new construction or conversion? I'll give one answer and we'll see if the actual planners want to call me out on it. But as I understand it, first of all, does the shed meet current building codes? Is there a foundation? Is it insulated well enough? And then second, if that expansion doesn't go beyond the 150 square feet for ingress or egress, is there a front door there or a back door there? It could be considered a conversion. Though there are other things that could get tripped in that project. Are you on the property line? Are you too close to another project or another structure that's going to trigger more fire code issues? So the answer is probably conversion if it's not a big expansion of the footprint. How did I do, planners?
That's the exact answer I would have given.
All right.
I would probably be a little more
Yeah.
nuanced there. So you get the benefit of a converted structure when the structure itself has already been permitted. So in this case, we have a scenario where I'm assuming a shed's been permitted and this person's in the process of building it, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, wait a second, what if I want to take this to an ADU? I think if you have an issue that you have not built the shed in a way that would conform to ADU standards, you should probably call a timeout on the shed construction and focus on what you would need to do to get it to be a conforming ADU. Or you could finish the shed, and at that point, it is in fact capable of being converted to an ADU through a different permit. And that's the type of conversion where you'd be eligible to add 150 square feet to the structure for the purpose of creating an entry, a provision of an entry space for it. So I sort of take it from the perspective of you need to complete one or stop and commit to the other. is sort of my perspective on it.
I would also
Right.
just add, permitted shed is the beginning of the conversation, right? So when I think shed, it's such a wide range where it means different things to different people. So if you bought that shed at, a wonderful local hardware store and put it up in your Saturday, afternoon chores, no, that won't be something that can be an easy conversion. It's not going to have a foundation. It was never habitable. It's not going to be like a garage conversion where we have guidance on that. Um, but if you have a big old shed that has a building permit on it, you can absolutely convert it. It might be more expensive than you think it will be, but it's definitely something we can entertain. We can join you in a dialogue on it.
Right. Okay. Let's see. We'll get through some of these funding programs, state, federal, local. There was a state grant. It's been canceled, or it's been spent. With the way that the budget has been going this last year, I don't expect more state money anytime soon. There is a Bay Area bond measure coming up on the ballot this November, and this is just for informational purposes. It's not pronounced BAHFA, BAHFA. That could be 10 billion or 20 billion towards housing programs, some of which may be used for ADU programs. We see like the affordable ADU loan in Napa County. But other than that, no, they're not currently, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But I'm hoping that there's additional funding for ADUs because I think ADUs are great. So, Sylvia, let's talk offline. There's a number of questions I saw that you asked. I want to give them the focus they deserve. Email me at scott at aducenter.org, SCOTT at aducenter.org, and we can go over all the things that you brought up here. I want to try and get to some of the other planning questions. Alternate systems, composting toilets, typically no. Where it's one of those things where sometimes regulatory it may be allowed, but the costs involved in actually complying with all the regulations for composting toilets mean that it really doesn't make sense. We often see incinerating necessary, plus a specialized truck route to pull that ash away from the site. Composting toilets are generally kind of a dead end from a waste perspective currently under the current rules. For Jim, what are the rules regarding usage? Great question. Family can live there. You can charge rent for it or not. The restrictions on usage are that you cannot rent it for less than 30 days. It cannot be a VRBO. It cannot be it cannot be a VRBO if it's rented for less than 30 days. But if you wanted to have your mother-in-law stay there for free, no problem. If you wanted to have it be empty and you store extra laundry in there, no problem. Once it's built, then it's how you want to use it with just the restriction that it can't be a short-term rental. Let's see, there's another septic question that I may come. Email me, Larry. Email me at scott@aducenter.org. I want to dive into that one a little bit farther. Setback rules are in general for incorporated Marin and for San Rafael and Novato, 4 feet from the side and rear. And the generalized state rule is that if you don't have room in your backyard, if you're out of those setbacks and you're keeping your building separation, typically 6 feet in most places from wall to wall, and you can't build 800 square feet, then there may be mechanisms to adjust the front setback to allow building somewhere else on the site. But in general, the simple rule is 4 feet side and rear. Let's see. Offsite manufactured pre-built units that meet building codes that are pre-approved by the jurisdictions. Yeah, so if they are a modular or manufactured home that is certified to be used as a residence in California, and that's not all of them that are out there on the market, by the way. They have to be stamped by HCD or stamped by HUD to be used as a residence. Those are the local jurisdictions, the cities will look at the local conditions. So your utilities plan, your site plan, your foundation plan, make sure that the attachment of that structure to the foundation meets code, but the structure itself is already pre-approved because it was built in the factory. It was viewed in the factory by inspectors in the factory to show that it was built to code. So the local jurisdictions pay attention to the individual site characteristics, but the structure itself is already pre-approved. And I'm trying to burn through these because we've got 5 minutes left. Margaret, Vivek, if there's anything you want to jump in, don't hesitate. Let me just what else?
I have two things I want to throw in while you're reading your next one up.
Yeah.
As somebody who had an ADU in my home for about 15 years, things I wanted to share that I loved having my ADU. It was really great. It was great to have spare space. It was great to make rental income. You need a business license. You need to think about tax implications, and you need to keep receipts. And what's another one? So the
Changes your
landlord.
homeowner's insurance.
And thank you. And the third is call
Yeah.
your homeowner's insurance. Right now in California, homeowner's insurance is a thing, and you don't want to get in a bad spot with your insurance company. So those are not meant to be challenges, but they're things you should know about as you're going through it that might surprise you in a good way, but you should definitely see them coming.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. 2 questions for people who are in HOAs. This has been a contentious issue in the past, and the state has clarified. HOAs can have rules about ADUs. They must be published. They must be easy to understand, and they must not preclude the creation of an ADU. So an HOA, CC&Rs, a lot of acronyms. An HOA, CC&Rs cannot outlaw ADUs. They have to allow ADUs in there, and that's been a very tough hill to climb. And I've seen evidence from all around the state that many HOAs are ignoring this rule. But that is what the state has decreed, and I believe has already been at least one legal case that has cemented that they cannot outlaw ADUs. They just have to provide guidance on what those ADUs can be.
And Scott, if I could tag on to an answer on
Please.
that one. I see the question here about HOAs taking precedence over local agency regulations. They don't take precedence over local agency regulations. Or separate. So unfortunately, if you have an HOA, you're going to need to satisfy both the HOA's requirements and the city's requirements. And we as a city or agency, we don't require HOA approval to grant our own permits. So that's really on the homeowner to work that out with whatever regulations they have with their through their CC&Rs and their HOA board.
Right. Yeah, the HOAs can get tricky, and they've wielded a lot of power in the past because they are kind of, as you said, they're separate, they're parallel in some ways. And the city's rules and the city's authority doesn't really override what HOAs get to do. But the state has been very clear. That's why the state did step in on this issue. Detached garage on the lot line in San Rafael that they have to convert. Very small. Would I be able to expand it? In my experience, and Margaret, please correct me where I'm wrong here, but my experience, if it's on the lot line, you're not going to be able to expand it because you're limited to that 150 square feet of ingress egress, and depending on what is around it as well, can make that 150 square foot expansion very challenging. Margaret, do you have?
That's exactly what I was going to say. You certainly could not cross the property line. That's going to go into the building code level. But right, you're on that 150 square foot cap for conversion, and that's an entryway. So it's not it. One of the things that planners say every day is it depends. So come on in and talk to us, and we can look into it. But it might be quite challenging.
Right. Yeah. And it's very often we'll see, if it's on the property line and it was built 70 years ago, it's actually probably over the property line. If you actually get it surveyed, we saw this all the time when we were working in older neighborhoods, that property lines were an idea, a suggestion, and not a hard fence back in the day. I see we're out of time and there's still a lot of open questions. I'm going to stay on and try and answer as many of these as we can. I promised our presenters that we were done at 7. But if anyone wants to stay on, homeowners and presenters, I will try and get through these last 22 questions. I don't have a comment on Superior Court and community plans. ADUs are kind of my specific. I don't know how to even begin to answer that. Anyone want to take a stab at that, or we'll dismiss that and move along. Okay.
I'll just say, Scott, that's a county specific issue. The county
Right.
was subject to some litigation over its housing element, and that's
Ah.
probably better for county staff to address.
Right. Okay. Um, do you guys have opinions about major prefab companies like Villa Homes, for example?
No, I think we're sort of indifferent on who the manufacturer is, as long as they're getting their state certifications for building code compliance. And they're, we're getting through, at some point through ADU Center, we will have pre-approved plans for the jurisdictions in Marin. I don't think it matters to us who manufacturer is.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say if you're looking at prefab, we have a whole webinar because we also work with Napa Sonoma ADU Center. And there's a whole webinar about prefab there that we're going to be bringing over to the Marin site because it works for all three counties. I will say that if you're looking at a prefab company, I have a personal rule of thumb in working with prefab companies is that I wanted to know that they have completed at least 10 units to move in. Because if they've done 10, especially in the Bay Area or the North Bay, then you know that at least they have a process that is working. There was a whole explosion of housing startups after the 2020 law change. And I would talk to these companies all the time and say, how many have you built? And they say, oh, we've got 30 in contract. It's like, well, that's not built yet. You haven't gone through the process. And building homes in California is a challenge. So if it's a prefab company that's completed 10 homes, ideally in the Bay Area, ideally in your town, at least one in your town, then that's for me, that was the baseline for when I would have a further conversation and then start talking about, their floor plans, their price, their process. But if they hadn't built 10, I would find somebody else. But that was always sort of my personal rule of thumb. 4-foot setback include overhangs.
That's a subject of conversation currently for some ADUs in Novato. So the way our ordinance is set up, it is an absolute setback consistent with the state law. So it doesn't acknowledge any encroachment into the setback area. And that is different than our code's arrangement for a traditional single family home. So I think this is something that Vivek and I have talked about, that as we go through our code amendments here, we want to talk about that with our decision makers as to whether or not they want to take an exception from state law and allow eaves and other projections into the setback area for an ADU. And of course, that's going to involve a conversation with our chief building official about how the building code treats those types of encroachments, because there are instances where encroachments then trigger elevated fire code requirements. So
Yep.
There's some trade-offs there. But I read the state's law to be an absolute setback, meaning all parts of the structure respect that.
Right.
We take a
I've
little
seen-
bit different version of that. We are 4 foot to the property line to the wall, and encroachments are allowed. We have an exceptions that I hold structures to any, houses and ADUs and such. But that's not the complete answer. And I want to make sure that people are still talking to the building official and the fire marshal, because yes, from planning, it still might be a no from building. We get all the fire separation. I know you can't cross a property line with an eave for lots of reasons, including fire. So we take it to the face of wall, but it's certainly not the final answer.
And yeah, and that tracks. I've seen, for homes that were doing an ADU above a garage, they'll often allow the stairs to be in the setback. But again, allow and there is a difference between something that's allowed, but then also it triggers additional restrictions. We would see this in the 4 foot to wall, but because you're less than 5 feet to the property line, you've got fire code, chapter 7A, fire resistant construction required in that wall, smaller windows, no doors, things like that. Same thing with stairs in the setback, that they would have to be enclosed or metal or non-flammable, because while they are allowed under planning code, they trigger fire code issues. And so sometimes, and this is why it's good to talk not only with your planning department, but building and fire as well. What is allowed in one department may trigger requirements from other departments that make that too expensive, too complicated, not possible for your project. So it is a lot of conversations to have with your city, but the more that you talk early on, the more that you can make decisions that won't have to try and undo in the future. Let's see. Both Jay and Larry have some septic questions. Guys, please email me. I want to make sure I'm conferring with the county to make sure I got those answers right. And again, my email is scott@aducenter.org. We're not looking at alternatives to septic. That's kind of not what we do. That's going to be up to your building department and your public works, and I believe it's the health department looks at this as well. So that's going to be kind of a political path, I would say. Talk to your board of supervisors about options and then see what can come out from there. I know the technology is improving all the time, but I don't know what's been approved at the state level yet. ADUs, lot splitting. So this has become more of a common question with SB 9, which is a ministerial lot split. I'll say that I'll let San Rafael and Novato talk, but what I've seen is that very often the requirements to split a lot under SB 9 are often so steep that very few lots actually do qualify. But where they do qualify, it's a great way to go if it works out for your project. But most of the jurisdictions, it's still fairly new. There haven't been a ton of projects that have been completed with an SB 9 lot split. And so it definitely requires dialogue with your city planning department and often the city or county attorney to figure out how that's going to work with the lot split and the MAP Act and all the other pieces that come along with that.
I think I would note, Scott, and help me out, Vivek or Margaret. I believe there was a recent law about condo mapping for ADUs. However, I haven't looked at the detail of it, but if I recall correctly, based on a summary, it was a voluntary program on the part of agencies to accept those. And I would just say at this point, Novato hasn't taken any step into terms of considering that type of ordinance for condo mapping. So really the only option for dividing off an ADU from your property is the Senate Bill 9 process through what's called an urban lot split, as Scott mentioned. And certainly that SB 9 process is more complicated than ADU law. So if you're interested in, or if a land division is important to your ADU concept, by all means, reach out to our planning department and we can take a look at what those possibilities are for your property.
Yeah.
I echo. Yeah, everything Steve said, I echo. And it's there's a lot of things, standards you have to meet to do a lot split. And you are definitely talking about splitting your utilities at that point, right? It's a more challenging, more expensive. It might be a better yield in the end, but it's a very challenging conversation right now.
Yeah, and I would say that's the same with the condoization, as we call it, the AB 1033, that it is opt-in for the jurisdictions, and it's a new thing as of this year, and many of the jurisdictions have not. They're busy enough that they haven't taken on this process to see how it works, and what that is very simply is that there is already a condo process on the books. There is the MAP Act, there is a bunch of legal paperwork that gets filed, and all the law does is allow for ADUs that have been built or ADUs that are being proposed to use that process, which is typically a $20,000 or $30,000 process, to become the smallest condo association in the town. And so I think we're going to see more of that in future years as cities kind of wrap their heads around it and have the time to process it. Whereas SB 9 is now several years old and was mandated by the state. But I still think both of those processes are not quick, easy answers. They often require a lot of discussion with the city. I see a couple of questions here. Dillon Beach, Tamales Bay, deck over the wetlands. I'm going to say on all of those. Those often run into those are in the coastal zone. There are a lot of particular issues, and I'm not comfortable answering questions about those projects from the information that I have here. And I would strongly encourage you, if you're in the coastal zone, if you're near the water, talk to your relevant agency, typically unincorporated Marin, but not always, because it is a whole nother level of scrutiny and things to consider when you're in those zones. You can build ADUs. ADUs are being built in those areas, but it is in some ways another level of challenge. Does an unenclosed breezeway from house to garage count as an attached garage? Most of the building departments I've spoken to say if there's a physical connection, if that breezeway is bolted to the side of the garage and bolted to the side of the house, that counts as a connected garage. But there is some gray area there, and so it is important to understand different building departments will sometimes have different policies with regarding to that, but it must share a wall to count as a connected garage. Some of them, it's, if there's a deck between the two, they're counted as connected. So in general, I would say if it's a breezeway that runs from house to garage, and typically they're not very long, that usually counts as connected, but confirm that with your building department to make sure that you're approaching your property the right way. Let's see. Prefab versus stick built. I'll try and be quick about this. We're 10 minutes over. Prefab versus stick built. Prefab's typically faster from a project completion point of view, typically about half the time of stick built. Cost savings aren't quite what all the prefab companies want you to believe. Once you get done with the whole system, you're probably 70 to 80% of stick built, if not the same price as stick built. In general, very generally speaking, they don't tend to appraise at the same level that stick built does. So if property value is a concern for you over time, I think that's going to correct a little bit more as ADUs become more common. I think the benefits really come from time, and many of the prefab companies these days in the ADU space are what I call turnkey companies. And so they do the permitting, the site work, PG&E, coordination with the city, coordination with the water agencies. And so there's a whole project management package wrapped up in that. And that I think has a ton of value because it is a big project. It's a complex project. This is what these folks do all day long. If they're good at it, I think having a team like that, your ADU permitted and built is a great idea. The other big issue with prefab, and prefab encompasses a whole bunch of things, to be honest, is site access. Site access seems to be the biggest restriction on prefab projects. Are there power lines in front of your house? Are there big trees? Are you on a slope? Are you on a narrow hilly street in the hills of San Rafael? All those things can really limit where prefab makes sense. A couple more down. I think I do want to talk about fees very quickly. I think I'm going to wrap up on fees and low income because this is a county program that I think deserves more credit and more exposure. Is that Marin County, if you're in the county, will buy down $10,000 of your fees if you sign a covenant to rent your ADU at affordable rates. I believe it's 80% AMI, but I will have to double check on that. They have a link to it on the county's ADU Marin webpage. But it's the only local Marin incentive that I know of from a fee perspective that encourages affordable housing. I think it's a great program. I would like to see more of those kinds of incentives for less years of deed restrictions, but they aren't eliminated, but you can buy $10,000 worth of fees. And I think I'm going to wrap it up there. There are still a number of good questions, but we are 15 minutes over. I want to thank all my panelists for coming out tonight and for staying over with us. I will try and keep copies of these questions. If you want to email me personally, scott@aducenter.org, with your question, I will try and answer it or get you to the right person to answer it, particularly the county questions. I'm sorry that we couldn't have Emmanuel join us tonight, but we will try and get all those questions answered for you. Just email me and we'll be in touch. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for all your time. And thank you to Amity Armstrong, who dropped, I don't know how many links into the chat and kept us running smoothly. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey.